1917. I left school on Friday. I went up to the colliery on Monday, ready to go down the pit with my father. When I got there was this huge steel structure with wheels on top and ropes going down into the hole in the ground. And two what we called cages, one on each rope. One was down, the other was up, and every other like that. They were fixed so that they would be able to move together. Well, my time came to go in to the cage with my father. I was terrified. I was afraid. For the first time to go down there, wondering what had happened. Anyway, 12 of us were able to go into what we called cages. That is the lifts which carry the coal and the men up and down the pit. I was put in the middle and my father had hold of me to make sure that I was all right. But anyway, one man now, it was the first time for him to be in the cage. Never been on the pit before. We went down and halfway down the pit we thought, it's terrible. We were going back up. Our stomachs were rising, we didn't know what was happening. On our knees I was ready to cry anyway, I didn't know what was happening. And this big man, he was calling, oh Mum, 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 let me go home, let me go home. When we landed in the pit bottom, we got out of the cage, we could see a big tunnel in front of us with electric light for a tidy way in this tunnel. I had to walk along with my father out of this tunnel, along this tunnel, to a little cabin where a man was testing the oil lamps that we had then. No electric lamps at all, only just ordinary oil lamps. So he had to test those oil lamps to see that they were in order, safe and secure. Well, we carried on then along this tunnel, lighted up, filled with different trams. Some were full, some were empty. Walking in now to our place of work, which it appears was about 2 miles in, underground. When we come to complete darkness, the only light we had, as I say, was the oil lamp, and that wasn't a lot. So we had to follow one another carefully. For me, to the first time, I was everywhere. I didn't know where I was. But as we went along, you soon got used to it because it was rough walking indeed. There were the rails for the trams, and on the side of the road then you encountered different holes and things. Finally we got into the coal face, and well, it was unbelievable. All in darkness, only the lamps. We could see twinkling lights then of the men that came in with us, spread along the face, the coal face. The coal face was about 5 feet 8, 6 foot high, and we had to work a stretch of that face, 6 yards each side of what they called the road. A road was driven into the ground and forward. Well, the road was 4 yards wide to enable the trams and horses and so on to come in and turn and go back out with the trams. Well, I had to take my clothes off, of course, down to my shirt, to my vest rather, not my shirt, down to my vest, and boots, stockings and so on. Well, my father showed me the face, told me what is what, helped me, carried on. Well, I had to go help him now. He not knowing anything about cutting coal. He cut the coal. I had what we call a curling box. It was a scoop, really, a half-rounded scoop that I had to fill that with lumps, pick it up and take it to the drum and tip it in. That was my job, and that was my job for many, many years, excepting that instead of my father was doing the cutting and preparing the coal and so on, I had to do it myself. And that's the job I did for some 40 years. Anyway, we carried on that day now. Well, it was frightening really, because you didn't know it was going to come down. The coal itself, the coal face itself, was worked in different ways, different colliers, different methods. So the place that you was working in had to be posted up with wooden posts. The roof had to be stayed up with wooden posts. So every so often, when the need arose, you had to put these posts up so that the roof above you would be safe. Well, continuing now, we filled the first drum, and I knew there were horses underground, I knew that, but it was, well, wonderful to see when the horse came in now, on the hallier, there was a man driving his horse, he was the driver, brought his horse in now to take our full drum out. Yeah, big horses in that colliery at that time, for a colliery, big horses. The notion was that they were ponies, but in that colliery they were pretty big horses. He hitched up to what we call the tram and took the tram out. I had to go to my father to fetch the empty from what we call the entrance of the stall in. Now you heard me saying about a stall. Now the coal face extended for hundreds of yards, and every so often, as I said before, 6 yards and 4 yards. Had to be 16 or 18 yards, isn't it? Well, anyway, you had every so that each distance there was a man and a boy or two men working their part, and so on right through the face. Two men next to one another, and it's laid out in that way. Well, we had to keep to our places. If we went from our places at that time without any reason or without permission, we'd be likely to have a summons, because it was dangerous to go from your own place. We had to stay there and do our work. Well, we carried on now working for the day, sweating and hard, wondering what's the best to do for my part anyway. I was aching. We finished the day, I forget how many drums we filled. We finished the day and put these posts up to keep the roof up. Went out with my father. During the day that we were there, we had only 20 minutes to have food, because our time started in the pit. It's an 8-hour day, and 20 minutes full, so we had to be back out by about 3 o'clock. Starting at 7 down and 3 up, 3 o'clock up. So tramp out over this stretch of tunnel again, got to the pit bottom and waiting our turn to go into this cage. Never expecting anything to happen in the cage to go up anyway. Went in the cage with my father, went up. Well, about halfway up the cage, when the two cages are passing, instead of going up, I could feel myself going down now. With the gravity of the cages in the pit. We landed up on top of the pit, scared stiff. And that sensation kept with us for a number of days until we got into the action of the pit, until you got used to going up and down the pit. That was really what we call a day's work. In that day's work, and as it was going on, you had to do various jobs as well. For instance, in these roads, each road, you had to keep the height for the horses that came in. You had to have height for the horses. So between this, in this 4 yard pier section, we had to bore holes in the roof and use explosives to blow that down, blow the roof down. Then it was our job to clear the rubbish, as we call it, the rippings, into the side where the coal had been taken out from. Well, after you'd cleared your place, that the place was clean of rubbish, you brought in rails, a pair of rails, add them onto what rails were there, and then you could take the drum on with you as you was working your coal in front of you. That was the system. You had to keep your rails right by, close as you can to where you were working, to save you walking unnecessary. We had other things to do. We had to siphon, extra safing sometimes, with what we'd call cogs. It was a square of timber. You had about a yard's length of timber and cut up a number of timber like that, and you built up this square and tightened it, especially for extra strength every so often as you went along this road. Took this road along. Now that was however long you were in the pit at that time, that if you was a collier in the coalface was your job. Cut the coal, hew the coal, any rubbish, you threw it into the waste behind you. Put the lumps, you're not supposed to put small in the tram, but sometimes that to go in. And you fill the tram, let the horse take it out, bring the empty in. It was a repetitive work in that respect right through the time you was a collier. And another additional job, which sometimes cropped up in that work, we had to put timber up, what we call timber. It's to keep up places in the road which is rather dangerous, and we put up what we call a pair of timber. You would have two big lengths of timber. You measure it up, and both of them up. Then you'd fix on them timber what they call a collar. Arms in the side and a collar on top of the two arms. And you secure that, and probably you'd have to put a second one up and then carry timber, thin timber, from one to the other to save that place falling, to strengthen that particular place. That was another part of our job, in our own roads. Well, when you go then, say 100 yards, you come to what we call a heading where they were cutting out our place. Now, they're going too long to take the horses in and out. So as we were being cut out, we'd go across this heading. We'd go the other side of the heading, and it'd be shorter for the horses to come in and take our coal. Easier for them anyway. That was the pattern of it. You take coal out from the face with the horses to what they call a parting, where the rails come in with a journey. That's the taken, say, about 20 trams in with you on rope, drawn by ropes. I'll describe that again. And then you would have full ones on one side brought out from the coal face, empty drums on the other side. When this journey comes in from the pit bottom, they change the rope over to the full journey, the full drums. They'd hitch the rope now on the back of the full drums as well, the rope that pulled in the journey, and then take that out. The horses then would be taking their drums in turn into the coal face, and that was their job, from the parting to the coal face, back to the parting for every tram. And as you go along then, you would make sure that there was no obstruction to the work going on in that way. You'd have to clear it. And when it came that you would want to do this boring a hole to blow the roof down, you would have a tram, fill the tram level to itself, then put a solid block of wood in the tram, and we had what was a boring machine. And we fixed that boring machine to the roof, proper and safe. Then we'd have two of us on a handle each and pulling a drill that would bore a hole. Now we had 3 drills, one was about a foot, the other 2 foot, and the other 3 feet, and then so on, as far as you could manage. When that was done then, you couldn't fill coal, of course. When that was done then, we carry on filling coal. And later on in the day, what they call a shot firer would come in. He'd plug that hole now with explosives and blow it down. Well, when we'd go in the morning then, we'd have a big pile of rubbish in front of us, which had to be thrown one side. But first of all, you had to take all the loose stuff that was around the roof, so nothing that would come onto us. That was the general pattern of working in the stall. Well, that went on with me, as I say, to close to 40 years. And I changed my work then to, because of illness, I had to go working with what they call a repairer. They now were repairing the tunnels, and some were repairing the main tunnels, some were repairing the heading tunnels, as we call it, back in the headings. Others then would be in the airways. We had the air to come through, and it came in a cycle. The air wasn't forced down the pit. It was drawn down the pit. They had the fan, as we called it, on the surface, and the fan would be drawing the bad air from the pit up into the surface. The vacuum caused then by that being drawn up allowed fresh air from the surface to go into the pit, and they could adjust the fan to what they wanted. That was the ventilating of the pit. There'd be another little pit beside the one, the big one that I went down. There was another little pit up which the fan drift, as they called it, the bad air would go on out into the surface. Well, we'd carry on now with this different work. And timber was all, as I said then, when I was there first, until later on they started to use steel supports, and that became what we called steel arches and so on. Steel posts in the coal face, and later on then they had steel machinery which could move with the face, and they propped that machinery up. It is hydraulic machinery which fixed itself under the roof to keep it safe. Well, instead now of having horses, they brought in what they called conveyors to convey the coal. It was, instead of having a long stretch of men working two at a place, those men now had one straight face through. The conveyor was fixed up behind you. You'd have one road where they took supplies in, and the other road where the coal went out to what they called the dump. That was the conveyor. So what was happening, you had to work before they had further machinery. They worked, the miners worked and threw the coal onto the belt. It was a type of strong rubber belt, and it was worked by an engine, a stationary engine, a dump engine as they call it, outside. And men had different jobs to do to keep that place going. Well, out in the dump end, they'd run the trams into what they call a dump, and the coal would fall off this conveyor into the tram. Once the tram was full, it was moved on, and in its turn every tram until the journey was full. The dump would be stopped for the journey to go, and another journey of empty trams placed instead of it. Well, that was the system then of conveyor coal. Instead of, as we had to do it, carried all into the tram, handwork, hand coal, hand fueling. Then they had what they called cutting machines come in, where instead of men cutting the coal, these machines would cut the coal. And they'd cut so much, and it would fall on special conveyors now. They had made conveyors that they could cut the coal, and as it was being cut, it was being diverted onto the conveyor itself. So there were less men wanted really there then, in that particular phase. and that went out automatically to the dump. Well, it stopped the place for a certain time so that it could be safened up with either machine support or steel support under the roofs. It had to be done so that they could shift this conveyor on tight again to the coal face. That was done every cut, as they called it. Every time you cut a stretch of coal, you had to shift the conveyor into its place so that the next cut could be done and put on the conveyor. Well, taking the coal out, you'd be wondering now, no horses in those places. Well, they had all horses in some parts of the pit, of course, where they could have no conveyors, such as in the airways and so on. But we'll have a little bit about that again. Anyway, the ropes now would go right to the pit bottom. You'd have an engine in the pit bottom, about 350 horsepower electric engine, stationary electric engine with the ropes, and they would draw the coal out similar to the rising and lowering of the cage in the pit. Similar things, only this was on the floor. That was the main part of it, until somebody then decided in some pits that they could take a conveyor right out to the pit bottom itself, to what they call a bunker, and tip the coal into a bunker which would hold about 1,000 tons. They'd have 2 bunkers out there in some collieries, and once one was being filled, the other was being emptied. So the system of haulage underground came out of the way. When you wanted in the inside of the place, they had small, what they call stationary engines. They were small engines which would take, say, about 8 to 10 trams out to the main parting where they'd pick up the big journeys. So that were the boys to engine drivers for that. Well, the job then, other jobs that were done in the face for the rails, keep the rails going, had what we called road layers or block layers. They'd put the rails down then for the trams to come on and keep the road going tight as they could to the dump or to the coal face. They'd ship the dump on as necessary as well, or add more belt to what they already had, but there had to be a limit to that, and they had to shift the dump then into the coal face, towards the coal face. Well, with the airways, you had to take the air would come in the main road. As you walked in, the air was coming in with you. Then you would go then right around, the air would turn right around through the various districts and so on. They'd split the air by ventilating doors and by ventilating tunnels until they come to one big tunnel which would go to the upcast shaft, as it's called, up to the fan shaft, to be taken straight to the air, the mucky air, to be taken straight out to the surface. That is the general plan of the mining industry and mining itself. It's something like you putting a railway from Paddington to Cardiff or Bristol. You go from the main station, that's the surface. The train goes down, it sets off a couple of carriages to go down to some other station from the main line, or they pick up another carriage to come into the other line. But as they go further away from the main line, you'd have to depend on that network of air underground. So it is a complex job to keep that air, an essential job to keep the air flowing freely through the pit. Some places where the air couldn't get to as you would expect, it would be very, very warm to work in. You'd have, in some pits they had no shirt on at all, they just in their shorts. But fortunately I never had to do that. I had my shoe stockings, trousers and vest. Well, we come to say now about the different seams of coal. Well, you'd have some seams of coal would be very low, up 2'6", 3 foot. It would be terribly working through there, although they had small conveyors to work through there in some corridors. But it was a terrible job on your knees all day. I was lucky. Very rare I went to work on my knees, because we had the height of coal, the thickness of coal. And they had to, in places, instead of cutting the top, as we call it, making room, they had to make room in the bottom and explode the floor of the place, so that the journey and the dump and so on would be able to tip in, the dump would be able to tip into the trams below. Oh, right. I worked 13 years in the Ocean Western Colliery, and they had about 1,000 men there. And speaking about horses before that, they had about 200 horses working in the colliery. Very, very little machinery. Well, I went to the Wyndham Colliery then in 1930, where they had machinery. Instead of horses doing certain work, they had stationary engines, compressed air engines doing the work. And the horses would be kept to the coal face only. But in the ocean they had only horses, except for the main journey, rope journey. Now, not having seen anything of machinery like that, it was new to me completely. I went there to work on the coal face, which I did for a good many years. Well, after my time on the coal face now, by the way, the Wyndham Colliery had 2 pits going, number 1 and number 2 pits, and they had between the 2 pits 250 horses underground for the two pits. And I may say here now, the stables, you'd wonder, well, how could they keep them down underground? They wouldn't come up for years, some of them. Well, the stables were very, very good. They were everything that could possibly be done to keep the horses and their condition up to the best that could be done, up to the mark. They were inspected, the the government rules everything to make the horses as comfortable as possible. They had 5 holiers in the Wyndham, in the one pit, and they looked after, each one looked after so many horses. Now, every time a horse went out to work his shift, he was seen to by the ostlers. Then they had what they call a vet, unqualified vet really, but the vet that was charge of 2 or 3 collieries. So there was always somebody able to see that the horse was all right. Well, before going out, the ostler would see that the horse had no cuts or bruises or breaks or anything on the horse at all. The horse was in good condition. You'd work the day. When he'd come out then at the end of the shift, they'd be looked at again to see whether there's any cuts or bruises or any damage been done to the horse during the day's work that needed to be seen to. That was carried out regularly. It had to be, according to law. So the food was of the best, the feed was of the best, the place, the cleaning up of the stables was of the best. They were brick floors and they were solid stone sides, and they were brushed out, cleaned, drained, everything tip top. So to say that horses really had a bad time, they had a hard time of it. And some of their drivers could be brutes too. But when they were caught, mind, they were severely dealt with. Anyway, that was the horse and how he was kept. He was kept better than many, many, many stables on the surface. Well, when I went there now, for the first time I saw what they call these stationary engines. Then they were inside the big rope engine, the big electric haulage engine. They took it into these little engines and then they distributed them around the coal faces. And they had ropes, of course, and the horses would pick them up on the parting. So that was my new ideas anyway. Well, we worked in, I never worked actually on a machine face, that is a conveyor face. I never worked actually on the coal on a machine face, but I have been in the face and done odd jobs to repairs. So anyway, they took in conveyors a year or two after I went there to the Wyndham Colliery, down in a different district to where I worked. I worked in one district and they took it down to the other. You can compare the districts in a colliery like the rooms in a house. You had the passage, and off that passage went various sections of the place to work in. And that's the pattern that you had there. Well, I went down to what they call the 2'9", and I worked there for some years till I had to get out through illness. Well, the pattern of working was the same as I've described previously. When I finished then on the coal face, I had to go back and do work with the repairers, keeping the roads open, the main roads open, and see that everything was within the law in that respect. No low roofs that would cause trouble, no unrepaired side walls that would cause trouble. The repairer had to see that that was done. 2 men who were timber in the first place when I went in both quarries. But later on, instead of using timber in the main roadways, the main tunnels, they used steel arches, which was much better. They were stronger, of course, and they take less space than timber and easier to handle in respect to placing them. Well, that was the general pattern of the repairs. Now, when we got into the faces, well, that face roads, that was left to the man whose road it was. That was his job. Anyway, I was put now on a job in the airways, where I had to look after this airway, like as if a stretch of passageway now was in my care, long stretch. I had to keep that open. There was the pressure of the ground, there was a pressure underneath you, sideways, and the airways, unless they were seen to, and the same way the main, of course, they'd become smaller and smaller, they'd be crushed together. So it was my job then to keep this airway open, so that I do keep the air going, the continuation of the air. Well, I did that for some years. So while I was there, I had a horse. I had a few horses during the time I was in the airway, but this particular one, now with the horses, you had some vicious ones. They were vicious, they'd have it. Others would be like little lambs, and the hauliers, they treat the most of them. 98% you could say treated their horses if they were their own children. And these vicious ones, well, you had to look out in it. They'd play tricks on you, they'd try and bite you. They were just vicious. So you had a job with them. Anyway, I had a horse now, same name as myself, Ivan. And very often somebody would call up now and come to fetch me for some other work, or as I was an ambulance man in the colliery, first aid worker, they called me for an accident. Somebody would shout up, Ivan, instead of me going, the horse would be going in front of me. He'd be running into it. That often come up. And when people come there and see the horse going, they'd have a good laugh over it. But anyway, he was a good old horse, and he was as gentle as a lamb. No trouble at all with him, with me and with my mate. But anybody else touch him, he'd kick out. He didn't want nobody to interfere with him at all. Let my mate and I carry on, and we'd do all right with it. But some people used to tap the horses on them behind, like, see, or give them a slap with a stick or something. But you wouldn't do it with him. One fella, one day, thought he was clever, and he did it. But it is only by a whisker that he didn't kick his head off. That cured him. So you see, there are different horses, different ways of treating them. Now, when we go in the stable in the morning to fetch your horse out, I used to take on many of the other boys, peelings from the house and vegetable bits and old apples and things like that in our pockets, and we give handful or two, mate and I give a handful or two to my pony and my horse in the morning. When it came to dinner time for us, was our food in the face where we were working. Well, we'd give him another handful or two of them, and when he'd come out, and you know, he knew the time. He was ready to have his handful to the dot. And if he didn't have it, and I sat down with we carried our food in tin boxes, Tommy box we call them. And if I was opening my Tommy box, he'd have his nose as near as he could to that Tommy box to see if I'd give him something. And the same with my mate. They were like kids. So the better you treated them, the better work you had out of them. And that was generally the way the horses worked. So it came now, when they altered the colliery now, they had these conveyors coming in where they wanted less horses. There was no stall work, what they called it. You had a long piece of coal and a machine put in with a belt about 2 foot wide. Right through the face, a belt on this machinery, which was driven by what they call a dump engine, the dump machine, all electric, and the belt now would be going around the pulleys and so on. Well, the miners themselves, the men themselves, were inside of that, between the machine and the coal. So when they cut enough coal, they'd throw it onto the machine. That went on for some years. So they found now that they had a machine that would cut the coal, and by modern methods, when the coal was cut, it would divert the coal, most of it anyway, onto the machine straight away, onto the conveyor belt straight away. So there'd be the minimum of shoveling the coal with the workman onto the belt. That was a big, big improvement, because you could keep it going and you keep the place working as well, and do your safety posting, which had to be done in any case. And in these places then, the coal would go down to the belt, go down to what they call the dump end, and it'd be tipped into the trams and taken out. And the empty is brought in, of course, and refilled. That is the system now. One part of this coal face, one end, was a road where they took in supplies to the conveyor, the posts and timber and any machinery and so on that is wanted to be taken in on the belt. Then down the other end, that was the face heading with the dump head, where all the coal was conveyed to be taken out. No coal to be taken out the other end. It was all had to go on to the one machine, so that all the coal coming through would be concentrated and quickly got rid of. Well, that went on for some years. Now, the different districts. Well, anyway, they decided now that the 3 collieries, the 2 in the Wyndham and the Ocean Western, would have to be joined up into one big area, so that all the coal could be coming out to one point. Well, they finally did that. They joined the coal faces up. They altered the shape, you can say, of the working. They had modern machinery, and no horses. So eventually the horses were completely done away with. My horse was one of the last horses that worked in the Wyndham. I was sorry what they did. They had to, when they killed him, they did so they could take him up. They shot him with a special gun, and that's what they done with few. But from then on, it was nothing but machinery from one end to the other. No horses. Now we had rats coming in to the colliery. In the colliery where we were working, in the second colliery, it was in the Wyndham Colliery, and it went to the ocean eventually. Rats, well, the cause of the rats coming in was the feed for the horses underground, and had to be spilled here and there, and when they take these bags of meal, feed for the horses, a rat could have got in on the surface, and a number of rats eventually built up. There was really a plague of rats. So we had to be content with them for some years. They were sending rat catchers and Pete and all sorts of people down. They kept it down. They didn't interfere a great deal with us working, but they were a nuisance. But when the horses were taken from there, no feed. Eventually, no rats. So that was one godsend of machinery. Well, I finished in this airway when they joined up this colliery. There was no need for airways because they could take us straight from one district. The air would circulate straight from one place to another with very little obstruction. And I was put on to be a block layer, we call it, but a road layer for the main roadway to the dump, the big dump. Well, there were two roads to the big dump. You were to one for the empties, one for the full. Then they had diesel engines. They didn't have the stationary engines. They had diesel engines, as you see on the big railways. The diesel engine, and these engines would pull about 20 tons of coal. So the two journeys now, one empty, one full, they'd be keeping going all day. Up to the dump, put them in place, fill up, off, back in. It was repetition all the way. So, in the sense of safety, it was a very good thing because you had less rope work, less small engine work, and with the horses, far less accidents. Horses used to be killed, men used to be killed through accidents. I've seen many of them accidents, very bad ones, and some fatal ones. I was a first aider for 46 years underground, as well as doing my own work. And in the district where I was responsible for carrying out all first aid work with accidents. So I seen a bit of my time. And very often I was a spare for the medical centre up on the surface. I'd work there for days, or a couple of weeks at a time when somebody was missing, the regular staff were missing. So I've had surface experience with first aid in collieries, and I've had underground experience. And believe you me, you'll be surprised at what we saw. Now, in London, for instance, when an accident occurs, you've got, even in fact there is, and on roads and roadworks and buildings, you've got ambulance cars practically within 10 minutes, quarter of an hour. Well, they had all the facilities and away with it. Now they tell me, I don't know, you leave, say, an accident on the road, you leave the person there until the police got a doctor or somebody that could attend to the ambulance come to take them away. Well, with us we had no such facilities. I knew of one district in the Ocean where I worked first was 4 miles underground. So the ambulance man there had to depend exactly on himself, the same as I had to in the districts in which I worked as an ambulance man. We had to very often dig a man out from under a fall of a roof or a fall aside, or been run over with a tram, or been squeezed badly with a big stone. Sometimes coal would fall on him. Anyway, I had to take it as it was there and see what I could do with the man. But once we had the bleeding stopped and so on, which we do, it was with first aid, once we had that under control, instead of having an ambulance car, we had to put the man on a stretcher, and 4 at each stretcher point, 1 at each corner point, and carry him out anything from 2 to 4 miles on rough roading. So it was not very good for the person on the stretcher, leave alone the man that they carried out. It was hard work. No doctor, you had to be really desperate for to get a doctor to come down underground. I've known of 2 or 3 doing it. I did do it. But it had to be a desperate situation to save life, where you had to give him morphia or something or other like that to quieten the pains. But even then, they had some of us, I was one, had trained to give morphia to see the doctor coming down, qualified to give morphia to see the doctor coming down. He'd be on the surface waiting for you. So we had to do all that, and when we were rescuing people from various situations, roof fall, journey smash up, or anything like that, or a horse, when we had horses, a horse and tram would be bashed up and the man would be pinned in the side. When we were rescuing them, especially where there were falls, you had to try and work around the man the best you could, and sometimes the roof would be falling as well and you would have to run and leave him there if you wanted to save yourself. Now, those were the conditions underground. You couldn't say really in a cold face or in where you were working in some of these tunnels. You couldn't say within a yard whether you were safe, because something, a fault, or something could happen, just a big stone would loosen and down. And you had it. So first aid work underground, believe you me, is a nightmare in some ways, but it's wonderful work to do. I had a wonderful feeling when I was helping people. Anyway, when I finished work, now there are some things underground that you've got to abide by rules. You shouldn't be walking on roadways that are working with ropes, for instance, because that was dangerous. You'd get, if you was caught without permission or without any reason walking along there, you could get summons. That was one of the very big restrictions that were on it. The only one that could handle and go on the rope would be the journeyman. He'd have to ride out with the journey. Then, when you go on top of the pit in the morning, you get searched by a man for cigarettes or tobacco, well, cigarettes or matches in particular. You could take chewing tobacco underground and chew it there, but don't take any smoking material otherwise, such as a cigarette or a match or a fire lighter. Any one of them, and you get summoned straight away. You have a summons paper straight away of the manager. Take you to court. Then you shouldn't wander, say, to different persons' area. Just the same reasons. Safety. Now everyone underground was conscious of safety. While you was working in your own place, you had a feeling of watching that there was nothing happened in your next place, and he'd be watching that nothing would happen to you. There was a camaraderie between the workmen right through the place. Watch your buddy, watch your friend working by you. If you see anything that may cause trouble, go straight away and help to get it repaired or get the man, if he is injured, out of the way. Everything was done that way. We had our quarrels, mind, but when it comes to safety and to saving of men and to the comfort of the injured, you wouldn't get anywhere better than a colliery. Now, so sometimes, especially in the first one, I'm filling in a little bit now with a few was First World War, when we couldn't get trucks to fetch the coal. All coal with the Navy then, no oil, well, practically no oil. They couldn't get the boats in because of the U-boats sinking the coal boats and so on. Well, there were gaps now in getting the trucks to the collieries. Well, the result was we were underground, except for doing repair work. What we wanted, we had to sit down and wait. They wouldn't let us come up the pit, but we'd have to sit down in there, in our places, and wait until the time to come out, say by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And we'd be sitting down there, say from about 9 o'clock in the morning, just pottering about to keep ourselves going. And when there was no official around, a couple of we'd get together and have a talk. Then we'd play tricks on one another, but we tried to keep it within reason. Especially we used to try on the boys. We'd make sure that they were safe. Mind it, we'd have a bit of a trick with the boys. I know I was tricked as well as anybody else.